is Stephen Crane, and I'd like to welcome you to my tutorial on how to use Fight the Dragon, its level editor. So, previously we went over the static props. I did end up figuring out what I was doing wrong on the stairs, so quickly I'll go over that, and we will jump into enemies for Fight the Dragon. So, pretty much, all you do is you have an elevated block that you want to get to. You will end up placing the stairs on top of the edge of the block, and it will automatically fill out the stairs for you. However, you do need to rotate it, which is what I was missing before. It was creating it, it just wasn't showing up because it was actually inside of the object. So, as you can see here, it automatically fills out the stairs to the ground level. And then if you have multiple placements that are at the same level, they just become side by side, so you can make a full staircase as wide as you want, or go up as high as you want, or at least as high as the level editor will allow you to. So yeah, that's pretty much it for stairs. Is you just place them along the edge, much like you would a window or a door or any hanging frame. As you can see here, this is the placement. You can always rotate it using the right and left bumper before placing it or after placing it. But yeah, that's pretty much how you use the stairs static prop. And then you can actually go under or travel up them. So let me quickly throw it in playtest here, and I'll go show you what I mean. Alright, so come over here to our stairs, and I can travel under, or I can go up them, and it just fills them out at the natural step level for the character movement. So you don't really have to worry about much, and they're pretty useful. The only downside to them is that you've got these floating objects, which bugs me a bit, but you can always adjust the ground levels beneath it. However, you do want to be careful that it doesn't read that it is building the stairs to that level. So it's all personal preference, but they are fairly useful, and I would recommend using them in your level. Alright, so let's get straight into the enemies here. So if you go over to entities, it will be under the enemies tab. Now, the enemies are one of the most costly in terms of blocks. So as you can see, our block count is 1,079 out of 8,000. If we place an enemy, any enemy really, it is an additional 15 blocks, which is one of the largest in resource cost. So do keep in mind when you're creating your level to leave enough block memory for the enemies, because they are pretty costly. So it is kind of something you want to kind of plan out early on, get them in there. If you know how many enemies you're going to want in each wave, or how many enemies in total, go in and put them all in the level to kind of allocate for that, and then build your level around it, and then you can delete and replace them however you want. But alright, so that is pretty much it for the memory usage. Let's get into the types of enemies. So you have your melee enemies, which are all ones that will come up and attack the player at point blank. You have your ranged enemies all the way on the far right of the selection, which are ones that simply attack the player from a distance. And then you have your mini bosses, which are tougher than your typical enemies, and also have typically better drops, as well as make it so the next chests that you open typically have better stuff in them as well. So let's quickly go over the enemy types that you can select from in here. You have rats, which are kind of your most typical enemy. It and the scarabs are kind of the weakest of all the enemies. They have to get up close to you. They do little damage. They're fairly squishy, so you can take them out fairly easily. Then you've got your uh, male brigand, as well as your female brigand, which are just human enemies. Then you've got your skeletons, your ghost knights, which the ghost knights are pretty strong. Out of all of the basic enemies, the strongest melee basic enemies would be the ghost knights, the minotaurs, and the trolls. So keep that in mind when you're placing them in your levels. That they are almost to that like mini boss status. They're just under it because they don't have any special abilities. They do only really just attack you. The one exception would be like the Minotaur. He kind of has some charge abilities. Um, so yeah, that's something you just want to keep in mind when you're placing these. These aren't all the same across the board. Um, each enemy kind of does its own thing. So orcs are kind of, they're fairly close to the humans. They have weapons. They're fairly easy to stun. Um, so you can hit one, stun it, and then take it out while it's stunned. Scarabs I kind of already went over. They're pretty squishy. Then you have your slugs, which the slugs are toxic. What they'll do is they'll come up and they will kind of spit venom at you. Where the snakes, they're a little bit more fast-moving, and they melee you, and they also poison you, where the slugs kind of spit at you point blank, where the snakes will actually melee you point blank. So the snakes do a little bit more damage because they have that base I hit you damage, where the slug is it just poisons you from a very short distance. The explosive scarabs are pretty much exactly like the normal scarabs, however, you can't drain their health below 1, and once they reach 1 HP, they start flashing red and then explode. Then you have your mummies, which are a little bit more tanky, but they're a lot like the skeletons, a little bit slower moving. So yeah, they just take more of a beating. They have fairly slow attacks, fairly slow movement, but they can take quite a bit. The zombies are zombies are pretty much just annoying. What the zombies do are when you drain their health, they'll fall down, and then they'll regenerate their health once or twice. So you'll have to actually kill each zombie up to 3 times before it actually dies. And I've seen a couple people use them a lot in single level and in single engagement even, and it gets really annoying because you're going and you're killing one enemy, and then it gets back up in a couple seconds, and then you gotta do it again. It's still not dead, and yeah, I would be careful on using zombies, unless you're going for that kind of theme, but typically it's more of an annoyance, so just keep that in mind. And then the Minotaurs, once again, they're kind of like mini-bosses. They have a charge attack, which they'll just make a beeline for your location. It's fairly easy to dodge if you're far enough away, but they are pretty strong, pretty difficult to deal with. Then you get your trolls, which are pretty much just tanks. They take a lot of damage and they deal a lot of damage, but they're fairly slow. They're easy to get away. And then you have your random, where it just randomly selects one of those. Then let me go over here to the range, cover all of these. So you have your skeletons, which are kind of your basic distance NPCs. A lot of the range NPCs are a little bit more annoying. They try to stay at range, so that's something you gotta compensate for, so don't go overboard with the ranged enemies. I've seen some kind of gauntlets that people have set up where the ranged enemies can't move, but you also can't get to them, and it's just you've got to get through as they're all shooting at you, which is fine. But keep in mind, if you can attack them, they're pretty annoying to try to catch. They'll try to run away as soon as you get close enough, so you have to be pretty fast about it. Anyway, so the skeletons shoot bows and arrows at you. Goblins will throw bombs that then explode. You've got your male and females, brigands, which simply just throw stuff at you. You've got your spiders, which actually shoot a web at you, and so what that does is it decreases the player movement to about 50%. So for jumping puzzles in particular, if you want to kind of add a challenge where maybe you don't want to damage the player as much, but you want to kind of throw a monkey wrench into the jumping puzzle itself. You can add spiders to try to like slow down player movement so they can't jump as far or at all. Um, so spiders are also a good balance to have. Maybe a couple in a fight where you want to slow down the players so they have to really stick around and fight it out versus run and kind of aggro them back and get to a safer point. Eyeballs, what they do is when they detect a player, they'll spin around until they're facing them and then shoot a laser. And as the player moves, they'll track the player kind of at a semi-slow rate. Um, and then the spike slugs are a lot like the normal slugs, however, they have a much further distance. Also, when you kill slugs, much like the explosive scarabs, they explode with a poison gas instead of an explosion. So if you're too close to them when you kill them, they will actually poison you on their death as well. Wraiths, they're pretty fast moving. They have the most free reign. They levitate, so they can like fly up to a ledge that's out of the player's reach and chuck stuff at you. Also, their melees are pretty powerful, but they're pretty squishy. So if you can get up to one, they're fairly easy to take out. Um, but they are that kind of healthy balance of range. They are kind of difficult to catch, but they don't run as frequently as some of these other ranged enemies, such as the brigands, the goblin, or the skeletons. Then you've got your mini bosses. Your mini bosses are, as the name states, they're small bosses. You got your necromancer who will summon other enemies. Your elementals will all pretty much do the same thing. They're just different elements. Where the lightning element and the frost element may freeze the player in place, and then do a ton of damage, where the fire element sets the player on fire or drops bombs on them, which just does a lot of damage. The rock golem is a lot like the necromancer, where it'll kind of summon enemies. It's a little bit slower than the necromancer, where the necromancer can kind of get away from the player, get at range. The pyromancers, pretty much as the name states, it throws flames at you. It's a lot like the fire elemental, except it follows more of human traits of movement, where the elements will just kind of stick around. The pyromancer will try to get away from you and do damage from a range. The worm is a stationary mini-boss. It will stand in one spot, and if you're close enough to it, it will try to bite you, or if you're far enough away from it, it'll spit toxic venom at you. So it's kind of like the boss version of the slug, except it's gain a melee. And then the Skeleton King is just that. It's like your basic default skeleton. He's got a spear and a mace, which packs a pretty good punch. However, they're fairly simple to deal with. You can kind of stun them with the first hit, get 2 more hits, and then roll away. And it's not too difficult of a boss to handle, but if you throw 1 or 2 into there, or you have other enemies, it can make the engagement quite interesting. And then, of course, you've got your random. And that is pretty much it for the enemies. I will quickly throw in a couple here just to show, for example. So let's put some ranged guys in. Yeah, let's just theme it with skeletons and the undead. I'll use one of the zombies, and then let's put some mummies in here. Alright, and then the other thing, as you can see here, you can fidget with some of their abilities or how they act. So you can make enemies under general either easier, normal, or harder to kind of impact difficulty a bit, because the enemies do scale based off player level. You don't have necessarily any direct control over how difficult they are in terms of like elements that they do. You can just control whether they're easy, medium, or hard. And then you can also dictate the range at which they will notice a player, as well as their initial behavior until they detect a player. So attack means that they'll just stand there until a player comes in range of them, and then they'll attack them. Wander, they'll slowly and aimlessly kind of wander around an area. Patrol is you set a specific path by going down to the modify path, and you place little nodes, and it will go around that path until the player is detected. And so yeah, it just goes about the patrol path until it notices a player, and then it will, of course, attack them. So, next we have actions. You can make it so when you kill an enemy, they'll drop a key, or specifically dictate what they drop. So you can have loot and potions, where loot is golden items, and potions are health and rage potions. You can make it just loot, you can make it just potions, you can make it nothing, so they won't drop anything at all, or you can make it a chance to drop both. And then visually you can either dictate what color they are, or you can just leave it at random. And then you can also scale them a bit. However, there's not a whole lot that you can do. It's only 10% scale, but that does mean that you can make them a bit bigger or smaller. So let's, I don't want to scale him down. Let's scale a skeleton up to 120%, so you can see the default versus the normal. And then let's make our skeleton king drop a key. Let's do a gold key and have him just drop loot. Alright, so now that we've got our enemies in, let's go in, play it. As you can see, they can't get through, but they've detected me, so they're coming to attack me. As you can see, that skeleton that's 120%. It's not a huge difference, but it's a considerable difference. Like, it's very noticeable. As you can see, my zombie here is regenerating its health, so now I have to take him down again, and he's still not dead. The mummy there took quite a beating. The zombie's back up for a second time, and now he's dead. And so, as you can see, like, that can get pretty annoying if there's a large cluster of them, or if you just have too many in a level. So I'm gonna go over here and deal with these guys. As you can see, dealing with the mini boss as well as the range enemies, like, the balance of that can be pretty difficult. So yeah, just keep in mind, like, how difficult you're making these engagements. Don't go overboard. Like, make it a challenge, but don't make it impossible, because with different enemy types, it dramatically increases the difficulty as you go forward. So just keep that in mind. Usually, the more of a single type of enemy you have, the easier the engagement will typically be. Once you start adding in different enemy types, it really adds difficulty to it. And that's pretty much it for enemies. Next video, I'll be touching on NPCs. We're going to skip logic for the time being. I'm probably going to leave that for last. And then after NPCs, I'll be getting into the VFX. I know I touched on it real briefly in the first video, but I'll go into more detail. And then the music, so the VFX and the music will be one video altogether. And then we'll go to the logic. Once again, thank you for watching. I hope that this helped you learning the Fight the Dragon level editor. Once again, if you have any questions or if you want me to cover something specifically, just leave it in the comments and I'll either reply to you, reply in the comments, or I will include it in one of my videos. So once again, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.